Hey there friends, it's Nick. So there's a moment in the final episode of Game of Thrones that doesn't quite work. So if you've not seen it and you're planning to see it, just pause the video or go and find something else to watch, because I'm going to be a bit spoilery here. But there's a moment where Daenerys Targaryen is killed and her battle commander and fierce defender, Grey Worm, who's in charge of a massive army, does nothing. And it's a real problem, I think, for the show, for the narrative, because it kind of puts a stutter into the story, because we're waiting for him to explode and he doesn't explode. And it is out of character. And, how many times when you've been watching something or reading something, have you sort of felt that little kind of stutter because what's happened doesn't make sense? And you see it often in dramas that are trying to ramp up the tension. So we watched Nashville, Wendy and I watched Nashville, and it got to a stage with that show where every scene ended in a fight. And, people getting wildly angry about things. And you think, well, hold on, there might have been a bit more progression. And I suppose that's one of the things that's been levelled at Game of Thrones, is that Daenerys went a bit mad, a bit quick. Personally, I don't agree with that, but it's a point of view, and everyone has different levels. But I think this goes to a question that I get asked sometimes, which is, what if I'm no good at telling stories? And I think the answer to that is slightly counterintuitive. But if you think you're no good at telling stories, the chances are that it's the story that's the problem, not you. Now, in one of the techniques videos, I talk about how good stories flow like water, and by that I mean that they, one thing logically leads to another. And I think if you've worked on your story, and so by that I mean you're not just sort of chucking in random details, and you're not going off on sort of great discourses and getting distracted and what have you. If you are moving your story logically forward through the triangle, so character, conflict, consequence, and if you've watched the video about the sort of the more advanced version of that, character, trigger, consequence, insight. Conflict, insight, consequence, change. And the change is very often the kind of the lesson of the story or the moral of the story. If you've honed that story right, you will be able to tell it, because it flows like water. Things follow on logically from another. And, we're kind of designed that way. So just a quick video today. But if you are worried about the fact that you're not telling stories very well, work on the stories, because once you have that logical flow, you won't have to be reaching for what's next, because it comes what's next. Because I think often, well, particularly on stage, particularly in a presentation, we're concerned about forgetting what's coming, right? And that's one of the reasons why starting a presentation or a pitch with a story can be so useful, because a good story structure flows like water. It flows logically. And it gives us a chance to kind of let ourselves into that moment sort of gently, if we're doing a pitch or a presentation, doesn't it? Because we can tell a story and the audience is immediately engaged, and you don't have to really worry about what's coming next, because the story, each part of the story is the logical kind of precursor of the next part. So anyway, the way to work on your story is go through some of the tools and techniques in this channel. Go through, if you haven't watched the beginning, the kind of start here playlist, it only takes half an hour, but you can go through and you can see some of the stuff that, why story works and what the structure is and all that kind of thing. And then you can take 3 or 4 of the techniques on the channel and build them into your stories. That's it's just work. It's just work. It might take a little time, but the payoff, of course, if you're doing that to one of your core stories, is that it'll pay off for the rest of the time you're telling the story. Okay, so if you'd like to get better at storytelling, please subscribe to this course, subscribe to this channel, and this is storyhacker.tv. I'm Nick Warren, and thanks for watching. See you in another video.